In the summer of 356 BC, the kingdom of Macedon stirred with whispers of destiny. In its rugged northern hills, far from the polished courts of Athens, a child was born who would one day set the world ablaze. His name was Alexander, son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. But his birth was not like any other. Ancient chroniclers, eager to cloak his arrival in myth, spoke of omens that shook the heavens. That night, lightning struck near the royal palace with a deafening roar, while far away, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the wonders of the world, was consumed by fire. To many, these were signs that a force beyond human hands had entered the world. Philip, a hardened king whose eyes were fixed on war and empire, saw in his son an heir to expand his dreams. Olympias, however, gave Alexander more than blood. She gave him fire. A woman of fierce spirit, deeply devoted to religion and mystery cults, she whispered to her boy that he was no ordinary child. She told him he was descended not only from kings, but from gods, the blood of Zeus himself running in his veins. Alexander grew beneath these shadows of greatness. He was restless, sharp-eyed, never content to play the games of other children. There was something untamable in him, as though the storm of his birth still lingered in his soul. The people of Macedon looked upon the boy with curiosity, but also with awe. In him they sensed a presence larger than life. His tutors, his companions, even hardened soldiers in Philip's court could see that this was not just a prince waiting for his crown. This was destiny, in flesh and blood. And destiny was only just beginning to stir. From the moment he could walk, Alexander showed a spirit that defied limits. While other boys of Macedon laughed and wrestled, he carried himself with a seriousness beyond his years. His sharp gaze missed nothing, and his questions never ended, about the stars, the gods, the stories of heroes. But it was when he was 10 years old that the world first saw the spark of his greatness. One day, a great Thessalian host dealer brought a magnificent black stallion before King Philip II. The animal was huge, powerful, and untamed. As stable hands tried to mount him, the beast reared, kicked, and threw every rider to the ground. The court roared with laughter at the spectacle. This horse, they said, was wild and useless. Philip, angered at the waste of money, was ready to dismiss the animal. But Alexander stepped forward. Though just a boy, his eyes shone with quiet confidence. He asked his father for the chance to try. The courtiers mocked him. What could a child do where grown men had failed? But Philip allowed it. Alexander walked to the stallion, studying it carefully. He noticed what the others had missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. With steady hands, he turned the animal toward the sun, so that its shadow fell harmlessly behind. Then he whispered softly, calming it, stroking its mane. And before anyone could stop him, he vaulted onto its back. The stallion bolted into a furious gallop. Gasps filled the court as the boy clung tightly, riding with perfect balance. Across the fields they thundered, man and beast locked in wild struggle. But Alexander did not fall. He guided the horse with fearless resolve, until at last the stallion slowed, obedient, beneath him. When they returned, triumphant, Philip's eyes filled with tears. He embraced his son and cried out, "My boy, Macedonia is too small for you. Seek a kingdom worthy of your greatness." The horse was named Bucephalus, ox-head, for its broad forehead. From that day, the stallion and the boy were inseparable. For nearly 2 decades, Bucephalus would carry Alexander into battle after battle until the very edge of the known world.
This was no longer just a prince. It was a boy already shaping destiny with his own hands.
Alexander's boyhood was not only shaped by courage and instinct, but also by knowledge. His father, Philip, wanted his heir to be more than a warrior. He wanted a king of vision. And so he summoned the greatest mind of the age, Aristotle. Under the philosopher's guidance, Alexander's education blossomed. He studied logic, science, politics, medicine, geography, and most of all, the works of Homer. Aristotle gave him a love for reason, but it was Homer's Iliad that set his heart ablaze. To Alexander, Achilles was more than a hero. He was a mirror, a destiny to be imitated. From then on, the young prince carried a copy of the Iliad with him everywhere, sleeping with it under his pillow, as if the words themselves were armor for his soul. But Alexander was shaped by more than books. Olympias, his mother, whispered into his ears that he was no ordinary child. Fierce and deeply religious, she told him he was the son not merely of Philip, but of Zeus himself. Whether it was truth, myth, or ambition, Alexander believed her. This divine conviction planted in him a fearless certainty. He was born to rule, born to conquer. By 16, his chance came. Philip was away on campaign, and a Thracian tribe revolted against Macedonian rule. Instead of panic, Alexander seized command. He marched with troops, crushed the rebels, and founded a new city, naming it Alexandropolis after himself. His name was carved into the map for the first time. The message was clear. Alexander was not waiting for the throne. He was already acting like a king.
Philip II was no ordinary monarch. A brilliant general and cunning politician, he had transformed Macedon from a backwater kingdom into a rising power. By the time Alexander reached manhood, Philip had set his eyes on the greatest prize of all, the conquest of Persia. But destiny shifted suddenly. In 336 BC, as Philip celebrated a new marriage, tragedy struck. During the wedding procession, the king was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own guards. The court erupted into chaos. Rival factions circled like wolves, and enemies abroad waited eagerly to tear Macedon apart. But Alexander, just 20 years old, moved with the speed of lightning. With Olympias at his side, he secured the throne, crushing rivals, executing conspirators, and forcing loyalty upon the nobles. When word spread that Greece had risen in rebellion, Alexander responded with fire. He marched south with his army and brought the Greek cities to heel. Thebes, defiant and proud, resisted. Alexander stormed the city, destroyed it, and slaughtered thousands, leaving only priests and poets alive. The ruins of Thebes were a warning to all. Resistance against Alexander meant annihilation. The other Greek states, terrified, submitted. Athens bowed, Sparta stayed quiet, and the Hellenic world united under Macedonian leadership. With ruthless speed, Alexander had secured his power. Now, with Greece at his back and Macedon's throne secure, the young king turned his eyes east. His father's dream was now his own. He would invade Persia. But Alexander's ambition was greater still. He did not seek merely to conquer an empire. He sought to change the world forever.
In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander stood at the shores of the Hellespont, the narrow strait dividing Europe from Asia. He had gathered an army of some 40,000 men, Macedonians, Greeks, and allies, and prepared to cross into the lands of the mighty Persian Empire. Before stepping onto Asian soil, he performed a symbolic act, throwing a spear into the earth and claiming the continent as his by right of conquest. Then, like Achilles before Troy, he offered sacrifices at the legendary site of Troy itself, paying homage to the heroes he so admired. His campaign began with a test of fire at the Battle of Granicus. The Persians, led by satraps and mercenaries, tried to halt his advance along the riverbanks of Asia Minor. The battle was fierce. Alexander himself charged into the fray, cutting down enemies with reckless courage. His helmet plume made him an easy target, and Persian swords nearly struck him down, but his companions saved him at the last moment. Victory was his, and Asia Minor fell into Macedonian hands. Everywhere he marched, Alexander proclaimed himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator of the Greeks who lived under Persian rule. Cities opened their gates, some out of fear, others out of hope. His charisma and energy spread like wildfire, drawing allies to his cause. But Alexander's dream was not to seize provinces and retreat. His ambition reached higher. He sought the heart of Persia itself, the throne of the great king Darius III.
In 333 BC, fate brought Alexander face to face with the Persian king. At the narrow plains of Issus, the armies clashed. Darius, commanding a vast force, believed he would crush the upstart Macedonian. But Alexander's genius lay in speed and precision. With his phalanx holding the Persian line, Alexander led a devastating cavalry charge straight at the heart of the enemy. Dust and blood filled the air as the Macedonian wedge cut through like a blade. And then there was Darius. The great king, seeing Alexander thundering toward him, lost his nerve. In panic, he fled the battlefield, abandoning his army, his camp, and even his own family. The Persians broke. The Macedonians triumphed, and in a moment that stunned the ancient world, Alexander captured the mother, wife, and children of Darius. Yet he treated them not as prisoners, but as royalty, showing them respect, ensuring their safety, and even calling them family. This act revealed another side of Alexander. He was ruthless in war, but he understood the power of magnanimity. His legend grew not only as a conqueror, but as a king who inspired loyalty, even from those he defeated. But Persia was not broken. Darius still ruled from the east, raising new armies. The road to empire stretched further, more dangerous, more uncertain. And Alexander would not turn back.
After Issus, Alexander marched south to secure the eastern Mediterranean. Most cities surrendered, but the island fortress of Tyre defied him. Tyre sat half a mile offshore, protected by mighty walls and fleets. The world thought it unassailable. Alexander, however, was relentless. He ordered a massive causeway built into the sea, stone by stone, to reach the island. For 7 months, the siege raged. The Tyrians fought like lions, burning Alexander's engines, killing his men, but the Macedonians pressed on. Finally, in 332 BC, the walls fell. Tyre was taken by storm, and its people slaughtered or enslaved. Alexander had shown the world no city could defy him. At Gaza, another stronghold resisted. After a brutal 2-month siege, Alexander stormed it as well. His wrath was merciless. The defenders were massacred, and the survivors sold into slavery. Then he turned toward Egypt, weary of Persian rule. Unlike Tyre and Gaza, Egypt welcomed him. To the Egyptians, Alexander was a liberator from Persian oppression. In Memphis, he was crowned as pharaoh. He founded a new city upon the Nile Delta, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. But Alexander's most fateful moment came in the desert.
he journeyed to the Oracle of Siwa, a sacred shrine of Zeus Ammon. There the priests greeted him not as king, but as son of the god. Whatever they told him inside the shrine, Alexander never fully revealed, but from that moment he carried himself not only as ruler of men, but as one touched by divinity. With Egypt secured, Alexander turned east once more. His true enemy still awaited, Darius III. In 331 BC, on the plains of Gaugamela, the greatest battle of Alexander's life unfolded. Darius had gathered a massive army, perhaps 200,000 men, including scythes, chariots, and war elephants. Alexander commanded barely a fraction of that. Yet he trusted in discipline, strategy, and speed. As the Persians advanced, Alexander spotted a gap. Leading his companion cavalry, he struck like a thunderbolt straight toward Darius himself. Panic once again seized the Persian king. For the second time, Darius fled, abandoning his army. The battle turned into a rout. Gaugamela was not just a victory, it was the end of Persia as a great power. Babylon opened its gates, Susa surrendered its treasures, and the jewel of the empire, Persepolis, fell into Alexander's hands. In a moment both symbolic and controversial, Alexander set fire to Persepolis, the royal capital of the Persians. Some said it was revenge for the Persian sack of Athens. Others whispered it was a drunken mistake, but the flames marked the end of an empire. Alexander was no longer just king of Macedon. He was lord of Asia.
Darius fled east, desperate to rally resistance. Alexander pursued him across mountains and deserts, determined to end the Persian line once and for all. But before Alexander could capture him, Darius was betrayed by his own satraps. He was murdered, left dying in a cart. When Alexander found the body, he covered it with his cloak and ordered a royal funeral. Now the last Persian king was gone. Alexander declared himself King of Kings, heir to the empire of Cyrus the Great. To bind himself to Persia, he began adopting Persian dress and customs. He encouraged his men to marry Persian women, and himself took a bride, Roxana, a noblewoman of Bactria. But not all Macedonians welcomed this. Many grumbled that their king was becoming more Persian than Greek. Tensions simmered between Alexander and his generals, but none dared openly defy him. He had become too powerful, too godlike to resist.
Alexander might have stopped at Persia. He had already achieved more than any Greek had dreamed. But his ambition was boundless. He pushed further east, into Bactria and Sogdiana, modern Afghanistan and Central Asia. Here, he faced not great armies, but endless guerrilla resistance. For years, his men hunted rebels across mountains and deserts. It was brutal, exhausting warfare. To secure loyalty, Alexander founded more cities, each bearing his name, each a beacon of Greek power in distant lands. But cracks began to show. Alexander executed his old general Parmenion and later his friend Philotas on suspicion of treason. Paranoia grew. Even Clitus the Black, who had once saved Alexander's life at Granicus, was killed in a drunken quarrel by Alexander's own hand. The further he marched, the more he seemed consumed not just by conquest, but by the belief in his own divinity. Crossing the Hindu Kush, Alexander descended into the lands of India. Here he faced new challenges: mighty rivers, monsoons, and strange beasts, war elephants that terrified his soldiers. In 326 BC, at the Battle of Hydaspes, he confronted King Porus, a towering ruler who commanded elephants and a fierce army. The battle was long and bloody, the Macedonians struggling against beasts they had never seen before. Yet Alexander's strategy triumphed. Porus, wounded and captured, was brought before him. When asked how he wished to be treated, Porus replied, "As a king." Alexander, impressed by his dignity, restored him to power and made him an ally. This was the last great victory of Alexander's career. Beyond the Hydaspes lay the great unknown, the vast Indian subcontinent. Alexander wished to march on, dreaming of reaching the end of the world. But his army refused. After years of endless war, the soldiers mutinied at the Hyphasis River, demanding to return home. For the first time, Alexander yielded. The conqueror of empires had been stopped, not by an enemy, but by his own weary men.
Though denied further conquest, Alexander would not return quietly. He led his army south along the Indus River, subduing tribes with ruthless efficiency. Many villages were slaughtered, resistance crushed without mercy. At last, he built a fleet and sailed down to the Indian Ocean, gazing out upon waters no Greek king had ever seen. For a moment, he felt he had touched the very edge of the world. The return march was a nightmare. Alexander led part of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, modern Baluchistan. Heat, thirst, and starvation decimated his men. Thousands perished. It was the harshest trial of his campaigns, and it nearly destroyed him. When he finally reached the safety of Persia, he was no longer the triumphant youth of Granicus. He was a hardened king, scarred by conquest and increasingly alone.
Back in Babylon, Alexander turned from conquest to empire building. He sought to unite Macedonians and Persians into one people. At Susa, he arranged mass weddings between his generals and Persian noblewomen. He himself took another wife, Statera, daughter of Darius. But this vision of unity met resistance. Many Macedonians resented their king's Eastern ways, his Persian robes, his demand for divine honors. Conspiracies brewed, and executions followed. Still, Alexander planned grand campaigns, an invasion of Arabia perhaps, even the distant western lands of Carthage and Rome. His hunger for conquest was unquenchable. But fate had other plans.
In 323 BC, at the age of just 32, Alexander returned to Babylon, the heart of his empire. There, amid feasts and plans for new wars, he suddenly fell ill. For days, fever racked his body. Some whispered he had been poisoned. Others believed it was malaria, typhoid, or exhaustion after years of relentless campaigning. Whatever the cause, Alexander grew weaker until he could no longer speak. His generals gathered at his bedside. They asked to whom he left his empire. His whispered reply, according to legend, was, "To the strongest." On June 10, 323 BC, Alexander the Great died. His empire shattered almost instantly, divided among his generals, the Diadochi, who carved it into rival kingdoms.
The dream of a united empire died with him. But the legend of Alexander lived on. Though Alexander's empire did not survive, his influence reshaped the ancient world. He founded more than 20 cities, the greatest of which, Alexandria in Egypt, became a beacon of learning, commerce, and culture. His conquests spread Greek language and ideas across Asia, giving birth to the Hellenistic Age, a fusion of East and West. Philosophy, science, and art flourished in lands once ruled by Persia and beyond. To some, Alexander was a tyrant, merciless in war, ruthless to his enemies. To others, he was a visionary who dreamed of uniting humanity under one rule. To all, he was unforgettable. Even today, centuries later, his name carries weight. The boy who tamed Bucephalus, who slept with Homer beneath his pillow, who marched from Greece to India before the age of 33, remains a figure larger than life. Alexander had sought immortality, and, in a way, he found it. For as long as history is told, the world will remember Alexander the Great.